What's up, students? Going to be talking with you about pre-Roman Italy and the Etruscans today. So some sources, secondary sources for this lecture would be Western Civilization, Beyond Boundaries, Volume 1 to 1715, the 7th edition. That is the textbook that I am currently using in 2020 for the course Western Civilization 1. There is a great courses audiobook version of this called Foundations of Civilization by Thomas F.X. Noble. If you want to listen to 1 hour and 37 minutes to 2 hours and 7 minutes of that lecture, it would be a good overview of some of the cultures that were living in present-day Italy on the Italian peninsula pre the construction of the city of Rome. That is available on Audible. It's also available on YouTube. And if you're taking me for this course this semester, I've included a link to that audiobook. Some documentaries, In Search of History, The Lost World of the Etruscans, and the Roman Empire, Rise of the Roman Empire. These are a couple of good documentaries for you to check out. And there are so many good sources out there if you're looking for documentaries on this topic. Now, some ancient, some primary sources that I will be referencing are Dionysius of Halicarnassus. His publication, Roman Antiquities, he is a Greek, and this primary source is a primary source for the foundation of Rome, right? The foundation of the city, and also the myth of Romulus and Remus. So, Livy, Titus Livius, The History of Rome, he covers Roman history from its founding in 753 BCE to 9 BCE, focuses on different aspects. Plutarch, Life of Romulus, he is a Greek historian philosopher. Both Plutarch and Livy rely heavily on Dionysius's accounts for their own accounts. Now, I will go into sort of each of their accounts as a composite narrative and survey some of the myths of the early events surrounding the construction or the foundation of Rome and the events leading to the establishment of the Roman monarchy and the beginnings of the kingdom period. Another primary source, Virgil's Aeneid. This is written under Caesar Augustus and tells the story of a Trojan prince named Aeneas who came to Italy and settled. Okay, so there are going to be three basic divisions of Roman history. So if you follow back with these lectures or you're taking me for the course, the Roman kingdom period, this is going to be 753 to 509 BCE. This is also called the period of the Roman monarchy or the regal period of ancient Roman history. It's also the early, middle, and late republic. Those are the three divisions of that time period, and that is 509 to 29 BCE. And then there's the Roman Empire, 27 to 476 BCE. So if you're being a student of history, if you're trying to follow along, you're trying to learn more about cultures, or you're trying to learn more about a certain topic, getting a basic chronology down is very helpful. So try and get those divisions down, and then within each of those divisions of kingdom, republic, and empire, you can kind of make subdivisions. Like I mentioned with the republic, it's a pretty expansive topic, so it's divided into early, middle, and late. Now, the kingdom period, there's definitely different ways you can divide that. I've kind of divided this into, again, the topic of pre-Roman Italy and the Etruscans, and then getting into the Roman kingdom period and its 7 kings as a topic, right? But really, even within that, you can subdivide it into Romulus and Remus, Romulus and a joint Sabine monarchy, and then the kings that come after that can even be divided into dynasties. So let's get into a little bit about Italian geography and the cultural groups that are inhabiting pre-Roman Italy. Okay, so if you have a copy of the textbook, Western Civilization Beyond Boundaries, It is map 5.1 in the textbook. Now, Italy is located in the Western Mediterranean. Everything I've covered previously to this topic in Civ 1 has been centered on the eastern portion of the Mediterranean. Okay, so we're shifting our focus to the west. Italy is a long peninsula shaped roughly like a boot, extends about 750 miles from north to south into the Mediterranean. And the greatest ports located on the western coast of Italy, which is going to be proximity to where Rome is also located. Now, some divisions of the geography. Okay. So to the north, you have the Alps. That's going to be the barrier from the rest of Europe for Italy. In the east, you have the Adriatic Sea. To the west, you have the Tyrrhenian Sea. This would be the sea that is facing Sardinia and Corsica. To the south, you have the Mediterranean Sea. Okay, now the Apennine Mountains, they run from north to south along most of the peninsula. And Italy contains some of the Mediterranean's most fertile and metal-rich lands. Is another thing worth noting. Now, when Greek sailors sailed to colonize Italy, they discover settlements already there, according to their accounts. Walled cities, kings, priesthoods, traders, merchants, etc. So the area is certainly not uninhabited, right? So that is one thing to definitely note about Greek arrival and interactions. Now, pre-Roman Italy, the founding of Rome and the settlement of Italy is shrouded in a lot of myth, a lot of legend. There's a lot of mythology. But there could be some truth behind these legends and stories. So, according to Virgil, the descendants of a refugee Trojan prince would eventually build the city of Rome. And I will make more remarks on that in a later talk. So, the story of Rome's origins began when the Trojan War ends. The sack of Troy is taking place, and a man named Aeneas, chief lieutenant of Prince Hector at the time of the sack of Troy, escapes with Trojan refugees, flees across the Mediterranean in search of a new place to settle with his followers. They travel to Asia Minor. They travel from Asia Minor to North Africa to the city of Carthage, which is at the time is under the rule of Queen Dido. Then they move onward to the coast of western Italy. Trojans are met with resistance by the Latins. But their king, Latinus, made peace with the Trojans, offering an alliance through marriage to his daughter Lavinia to Aeneas. So this is going to be a very upsetting news for Turnus. Turnus is a prince of a nearby tribe called the Tutuli, and he is to marry Lavinia. He is angered by her marriage to Aeneas, and he leads an attack against a combined force of Trojans and Latins, killing King Latinus in the attack, but ultimately losing a decisive victory in the battle. Now, Aeneas is left in control of the Trojans and Latins, who begin intermarrying, and Turnus and the Rutuli turned to the north to the Etruscans, a cultural group there, for help. The Etruscans attacked, but Aeneas is able to repel their invasion and establishes a border for the Latins and the Etruscans at the Tiber River. So, who are these Latins and who are these Etruscans, and where do they all come from? That's kind of what we want to get into. When the Greeks sailed into Italy, they already encountered these cultural groups. Now, DNA evidence does point to a potential migration from Asia Minor, so this could give some contextual depth to the Aeneas story, right? Now, the Etruscans were going to be the dominant force on the peninsula and would come to dominate Latin territory late during the Roman Kingdom period, as we'll discuss later on. So let's talk a little bit more about Rome's neighbors before we get in depth on the Etruscans. We'll start with Etruria. Now, this is the area of modern Tuscany. Okay, this is where the Etruscans lived. This is where they are centrally located, right? So they were to the north of Rome, along the western coast of Italy. Etruria is rich in agricultural production. They had developed cities. They had a confederation long before the Latins, who remained very tribal until the foundation of Rome. The Etruscans traded with the Greeks in Magna Graecia, or Sicily. And, we see a lot of cross-cultural, shared cultural traditions by the Romans or the Latins and the Etruscans later on, like a lot. So let's talk about Latium, or the Latins. Latium and the Latins. This is a region where Rome is located, right? So we're talking still before the foundation of the city. Latium is home to a number of Latin-speaking towns and villages, none of them really united into a confederation like the Etruscans. This is in the center of the Italian peninsula. Okay, Rome acquired the Latin language from Latium, and Latin will form the basis of half of the languages in Europe. And we see that language is one cultural element that really binds these Latin tribes together. Their language differs from the Etruscan language and differs from the Greeks to the south. So the Latins were pastoral herdsmen and farmers, and likely descendants from migrants from the Balkans. The Latins eventually became very powerful and founded a settlement to the east and named it Alba Longa. Now, Campania, this would be the region of Naples. Magna Graecia, I mentioned, this is the heel and toe of the Italian peninsula. This is the island of Sicily, and this is where a large number of Greek colonists had settled there in southern Italy. The Celts, also called the Gauls by the Romans, they crossed the Alps and settled in northern Italy after 500 BCE, so we'll talk about them later. The Sabines, this group would have much interaction with Rome and the Latins and the cultural groups, and would even furnish the Roman monarchy during the kingdom period with Sabine kings. And the Sabines were a mountainous people. There are other mountainous people, warlike mountainous people. The Samnites were a mountainous people that conquered their neighbors and would eventually be conquered by Rome when Rome becomes ascendant. The Lucanians, another warlike cultural group who lived in south central Italy, they too would eventually be conquered by the Romans. The Greeks, arguably no other civilization influenced the Romans more than the Greeks. Their art and architecture are two places we see a lot of influence being very apparent, as well as religion and other cultural elements. So let's talk about next the Etruscans, right? So the heading I have for the Etruscans is brilliant, wealthy, and warlike. Now, they're an ancient cultural group. It's ascendant, and again, they're the power of the peninsula in the region. The Etruscans were Italy's first great known culture, their origins being traced around 900 BCE in northern Italy along the western coast of the peninsula there. They may have evolved from farmers that had already been there. They may have migrated from Europe or from northern Africa or Asia Minor. We simply do not know for sure. Herodotus said they migrated from Asia Minor, and there is some DNA evidence for that as well. The Etruscans were organized into a loose confederation of 12 city-states, which were centered in the region of Etruria, or modern Tuscany. These city-states lasted for around 500 total years. They were very wealthy. Their primary economic activities were mining, farming, and trade. They lived in an agriculturally rich part of Italy on the plains of Etruria in present-day Tuscany, as I mentioned. The Etruscans had a notable maritime fleet. They engaged also in piracy. They contained rich deposits of iron ore and tin. It's the richest in all the Mediterranean world. They mined also for copper and silver, and they traded those metals to places like Syria, Portugal, and Sweden. They also grew wealthy through trade interactions with the Celts. They also traded with the Greeks and the Carthaginians in northern Africa. They guarded their ports fiercely and plundered and looted other ships. And the Etruscans would go on to teach the Romans many things. Okay, now here's the unfortunate thing about the Etruscans. They left no written records, and we understand very little about their language. What we do know about the Etruscans comes from archaeological evidence and partial understandings of their writings. Okay, there have been, interestingly enough, over 500,000 Etruscan tombs, which still remain. And Etruscan dwellings were made from clay and wood and have not really stood the test of time, but these tombs have, as I will talk about in a moment. Their language definitely had a serious Greek influence, but the language has not been fully decoded. No Etruscan literature remains, just brief inscriptions. Okay, so now here's where we draw quite a bit about them. Looking at their burial traditions, looking at how they saw the afterlife, and they saw it as a more vital and dynamic part of existence than physically living in your body. So they constructed twin cities where they lived. They would make an acropolis for the living and a necropolis for the dead. Okay, so they would basically construct these twin houses. One that would serve as a tomb in sorts, and then one where you would just live your normal living life. They cremated their dead. They believed in importance of placing food and other items in tombs. Eventually, their burial customs over time became very ritualized, and they started burying their dead intact at some point in these tombs. The wealthy, they would stylize their tombs to replicate their personal home, almost in a mirror image. Walls would contain scenes of daily life of the Etruscans. They were skilled artisans, metal workers. They crafted metal and terracotta sculptures and statues. They were skilled architects. And they also built their settlements on steep hills with fortified walls. The architecture was certainly influenced by their Greek neighbors. And the Greeks do report meeting the Etruscans before Rome was ever constructed. The Etruscans are deeply religious. They practiced divination in a variety of ways. They were familiar with Greek mythology, and the Romans later on took much of their religion from the Etruscans as well as the Greeks, kind of a hybridized reinvention. They would take Greek gods and put their own spin on them, essentially. They were polytheistic, as you can tell, and they believed that their deities were involved in human affairs. They believed in prophecy and observing the natural world empirically in order to determine the divine will of the gods. Some ways that they participated in that divination would be examining the entrails of freshly killed or sacrificed animals. They would observe patterns of flight in birds and lightning to help determine the will of the gods. They divided 16 total deities into different regions of the sky. They considered the liver to be a representative model of the universe. The liver of a freshly slaughtered sheep, for example, would be something that would be examined in order for the priest to make a connection between the liver and the understanding of the will of the gods. So it was a Roman priest who had been trained by the Etruscans who warned Julius Caesar about the Ides of March, apparently. It is believed that stone channels found were used to funnel blood during the rituals of high priests, which would engage in ritualistic human sacrifice. According to a myth found in numerous Etruscan tombs depicting Achilles' sacrifice of Trojan prisoners, the Etruscans treated their prisoners poorly. The Etruscans consulted an oracle about treating their prisoners poorly and had been told to create athletic games to promote the virtues of fairness. So, little origin there on some of their leisurely activities. We'll remark more on that later. Etruscan women had unique social status. Women kept their own names, and Etruscan children bore the names of both parents. Women were not shamed in Etruscan society. Portraits of sensual pleasure are dedicated, as well as women attending athletic contests in the presence of nude male athletes. Greek women would never attend a banquet like that in this contrast. Many tombs show displays of love and affection between Etruscan men and women. Etruscans would have lavish banquets with endless glasses of wine being served by slaves, and they would also play music at these events, such as flutes would be played alongside many Etruscan activities, such as eating, beating slaves, lovemaking, hunting. These are all activities that the Greeks depict the Etruscans engaging in while music is being played. The Etruscans are also said to have been able to lure animals from the forests with their music, and that is just a little bit about their music. And they would make their slaves play flutes as they just walked. The Etruscans were class-based, so there was a thriving slave trade. Slaves served, I mentioned, musicians and dancers, cooks, servers. They were not buried in, but depicted in tombs of the aristocracy. The Etruscan men staged games at funeral events where slaves would fight to the death. Okay. The dead would serve as an offering to the gods for the deceased, of whom they were having the funeral celebration. Those who were sacrificed were slaves or criminals in Etruscan society, and this is seen as an inherited tradition by the Romans later on. Games that we see the Etruscans engaging in, things like boxing, gladiatorial combat, and things like dogs attacking slaves, which seem to be depicted as a game. So guys, that's a little bit on pre-Roman Italy, some Italian geography, and some comments on the Etruscans. Now, the next lecture I'm going to be uploading is going to go more into the Latin peoples and Latium and Romulus and Remus and that myth and the foundation of Rome. So check back for that. I'm going to go into detail on early Roman history and the foundations of the kingdom period. So check back for that. Thank you for listening, and we will talk to you all soon. Thanks.